Have you ever felt a sudden chill when standing next to someone who seemed perfectly kind? A quiet, inexplicable discomfort, like your intuition was whispering a warning your mind couldn't yet translate. You smiled back, but something inside you stayed alert. Carl Jung once said that the greatest dangers are never external. They hide in the unseen movements of the psyche, in patterns that seem harmless, even virtuous. He spent decades mapping those hidden terrains, trying to understand why certain people radiate unease, even when their words sound pure. That chill you feel is not superstition. It is your psyche sensing a distortion of truth, a fracture between what someone believes about themselves and what truly lives inside them. According to Jung, this fracture marks the most dangerous sign in a person. It is not anger, not selfishness, not even cruelty. It is the loss of inner reflection, the death of self-doubt. When a person can no longer question themselves, every shadow becomes someone else's fault. Every impulse feels justified. Every emotion is righteous. They move through the world as if they carry divine permission, blind to the harm left in their wake. Jung observed that evil, in psychological terms, rarely announces itself with horns and fire. It arrives dressed as certainty. It smiles. It quotes wisdom. It speaks of truth and justice and love. Yet underneath it has lost the ability to see its own face. The most dangerous sign is not a visible behavior. It is a collapse inside the mind, when self-awareness is replaced by conviction. From that collapse, 5 patterns emerge, 5 disguises of the same disease. Each begins with noble intention and ends in distortion. The ancient mystics knew this long before psychology existed. They warned of false light, of the mirror that blinds rather than reveals. Jung simply gave those warnings a scientific language. He found that beneath every corrupted ideology, every broken relationship, and every act of moral fanaticism lies one repeated symptom: the absolute certainty that one cannot be wrong. That certainty is what your body senses before your mind understands. It's what makes your stomach tighten in the presence of the perfectly composed smile. It's what sends a chill through your spine when words and energy don't match. Because on some level, you know that when doubt dies, danger begins, and that chill is the soul's first defense. But how does this certainty disguise itself? What forms does it take? How does it turn ordinary people into reflections of the very darkness they condemn? To see it clearly, we must begin with the first mask, the distorted mirror of shadow projection. Imagine meeting someone who insists they can read your intentions, who accuses you of motives you never had, emotions you never felt, and lies you never told. They speak with such conviction that, for a moment, you begin to doubt yourself. Jung called this phenomenon shadow projection, the first mask of the most dangerous sign. It begins quietly, almost invisibly. A person represses a part of themselves they cannot accept, anger, envy, greed, fear, and imagines they have banished it forever. But the psyche doesn't forget. What is denied in the self returns through others. Soon they begin to see their hidden qualities everywhere. The liar finds liars. The manipulator finds manipulation. The jealous one feels surrounded by envy. The world becomes a distorted mirror, reflecting their own unseen face back at them. And because they cannot question themselves, because the inner witness has gone silent, they truly believe that what they see is real. This is what makes the pattern so destructive. The person is not pretending. They are possessed by the illusion that their projection is truth. In this way, the absence of self-doubt turns perception into weapon. Every disagreement becomes proof. Every boundary feels like betrayal, and every attempt to reason with them only deepens the distortion. Ancient traditions warned of this same blindness. Buddhist masters spoke of the darkened mirror, the mind clouded by its own impurities. The Gospel of Matthew asked, "Why do you see the speck in your brother's eye but fail to notice the beam in your own?" Jung understood that these weren't moral lessons, they were psychological maps. When projection becomes chronic, reality bends. People stop seeing others as living beings and start seeing them as containers for their disowned pain. They accuse with moral certainty, unaware that what they are describing lives within. They do not lie. They simply do not see. To the one on the receiving end, It feels like standing before a mirror that reflects nothing you recognize. Their words pierce, not because they are true, but because they reveal the power of the unseen. You may feel small, confused, even guilty, until you remember, this is not about you. It's a battle being fought inside their own mind, projected onto the nearest surface, your face. And still, the question remains. How can something invisible cause such chaos? Because the human psyche is magnetic. It draws toward itself what it refuses to integrate. The more we run from a part of our own nature, the more we attract it disguised as fate. This is the first expression of the most dangerous sign, certainty without reflection. The conviction that I see clearly when the eyes themselves are clouded. It is not malice that makes it dangerous, it is blindness. Blindness defended as truth. The distorted mirror shows us what happens when a person mistakes their inner darkness for the world itself. And yet, the opposite illusion can be just as lethal, when someone mistakes their inner light for the voice of God. That illusion has a name. Jung called it psychic inflation. The moment when certainty grows so bright, it burns through doubt itself. Not all darkness hides in shadows, some of it shines. Jung called this state psychic inflation, when the ego swells with light so blinding it mistakes itself for the source. The person no longer says, I have an opinion. They say, I know the truth. It doesn't matter whether that truth is religious, political, moral, or spiritual. The pattern is always the same. A fragile human mind fuses with something vast, an archetype, a cause, an idea, and loses the capacity to question its own conviction. Inflation is more dangerous than arrogance because it feels holy. It hides behind purity, love, justice, enlightenment. Its certainty feels sacred, its confidence magnetic. It speaks with calm authority, and people listen, because certainty is seductive. It offers relief from the chaos of ambiguity. But certainty without reflection is not strength. It's possession, and like all possessions, it demands worship. Jung wrote that the inflated person has become identical with the God image instead of standing before it. In that identification, they lose proportion. They stop being human and start becoming a symbol of their own making. They no longer say, I am trying to live with integrity. They say, I represent the good. That is the threshold where corruption begins, because the moment we believe we are the good, we become capable of anything in its name. History is filled with those who justified cruelty as salvation. Religions built on love have burned people alive. Movements born for justice have silenced dissent. And in every case, the faces of those in power carried the same expression, calm, righteous certainty. Jung saw that this was not evil in the traditional sense. It was psychological inflation, the ego stretched beyond what it can bear. He compared it to a balloon filled with divine air. The more it swells, the thinner its walls become. And when it bursts, the collapse is catastrophic. The inflated personality cannot stand contradiction. They do not argue. They declare. They do not listen. They pronounce. Every challenge to their certainty feels like an attack on truth itself. They interpret disagreement as ignorance and humility as weakness. But in reality, the light they project outward is only the shadow of what they've lost within, the humility to doubt. True wisdom has always been cautious. Socrates said, I know that I know nothing. The Buddha warned against the delusion of attainment. Mystics from every faith insisted that divine insight always begins with unknowing. The dangerous light, however, knows no such restraint. It blinds through radiance. It convinces through intensity. It turns self-awareness into doctrine and presence into persuasion. And beneath that glow, the most dangerous sign thrives, the absolute conviction of being right. You can recognize it not by what people preach, but by how they respond to doubt. When humility is gone, when reflection has vanished, when light refuses to cast a shadow, you are not in the presence of enlightenment. You are standing before inflation. And yet, this illusion of moral perfection has another form. When the light can no longer expand, it hardens into a mask, a flawless image worn so tightly that even the person behind it forgets who they are. This, Jung warned, is the next disguise of the same disease. It's not light that blinds us now, but perfection itself. Not every illusion shouts. Some smile. When light can no longer expand, it freezes. It becomes a polished image, a persona so perfect it suffocates the human being behind it. Jung called this complete identification with the persona, the moment a person stops wearing a mask and starts becoming it. The persona is not evil by itself, it is necessary, a bridge between our inner world and the outer one. We need it to survive, to function, to belong. But when someone forgets that it is only a mask, the soul begins to vanish behind the performance. They speak flawlessly. They smile at the right time. Their posture, their tone, their words, all are perfectly rehearsed. And yet, something in your body recoils. A faint discomfort, a whisper of wrongness. You cannot name it, but your intuition can, because the body recognizes what the mind denies. The absence of authenticity. Mirror neurons fire, detecting the dissonance between words and emotion, between the surface and the depths. It feels like watching a hologram of humanity, beautiful, impressive, but empty. The tragedy of the perfect mask is that it begins with good intentions. The child who learned that love must be earned. The adult who discovered that success demands control. Little by little, the face adapts to what the world rewards, until one day the mask fits so tightly that the original face can no longer breathe. Jung called this living from the outside. It means all psychic energy is invested in appearance, none in truth. A person becomes a role. They no longer feel, they perform. They no longer connect, they impress. But perfection is brittle. No mask can contain the chaos of a living soul forever. Behind every flawless surface, pressure builds. The emotions denied, the impulses repressed, the shadows sealed away, all begin to tremble beneath the porcelain smile. And when the fracture comes, it is rarely graceful. It can appear as an outburst, an act of cruelty, an addiction, a collapse. Observers will say, it's so unlike them. But it isn't. It's exactly them. The part that had been exiled finally forcing its way back into existence. Marie-Louise von Franz, Jung's closest collaborator, once wrote that those who appear the most well-adjusted are often closest to breakdown, because they have traded their soul for adaptation, and the psyche does not tolerate lies indefinitely. When you meet the perfect mask, you may feel compelled to trust it. It looks safe, stable, admirable, but trust the small discomfort that stirs inside you. It is your intuition remembering that authenticity always carries imperfection. The truly integrated person stumbles, hesitates, laughs at their own contradictions. Their eyes are alive, not polished. Their flaws make them real. The most dangerous sign, however, fears imperfection like death. It must appear right, moral, enlightened, always. And so, the mask grows harder, thicker, colder, until it becomes indistinguishable from the face beneath. When the mask finally cracks, the darkness it has been hiding erupts in full force, because what has been denied too long eventually takes control. And when that happens, something ancient awakens inside the psyche, something larger than the individual, older than the self. It is no longer the mask that speaks, but the archetype behind it. This is the next stage of the descent, the moment when gods take over. There comes a moment when the mask no longer hides the self, because the self is gone. What stands before you may still look human, but something else is speaking through the eyes. The warmth of doubt, the flicker of contradiction, the fragile awareness of being imperfect, all have vanished. In their place, conviction, cold, radiant, absolute. Jung called this archetypal possession. It is what happens when a person's ego is swallowed by forces far greater than any individual mind. They are no longer acting as a savior, a victim, a warrior, a judge. They are those archetypes fully inhabited, stripped of personal perspective. The mother who smothers in the name of love, the leader who destroys in the name of order, the believer who condemns in the name of light. Each speaks with divine certainty, but their words carry the chill of something impersonal, a cosmic script being played out through a fragile human vessel. You can feel it when it happens. Their eyes change first. A strange intensity replaces warmth. Their speech becomes mechanical, repetitive, absolute. They do not listen, they proclaim. They do not relate, they command. You are no longer speaking to a person, you are speaking to an idea that believes it has a soul. Traditional cultures understood this state long before Jung gave it a name. They called it possession. Shamans trained for years to invite divine forces only within sacred boundaries, because without those boundaries, the gods devour the host. The energy that once inspired wisdom now drives madness. In modern terms, we call it obsession, fanaticism, extremism. But Jung saw the same ancient pattern beneath each, the human ego collapsing under the weight of something archetypal, and mistaking that collapse for enlightenment. Archetypal possession is the ultimate form of the most dangerous sign. It is certainty raised to a cosmic level. The person believes they are no longer speaking for themselves, but for truth, justice, or God. And when someone thinks they are the voice of truth itself, no act seems too extreme. Jung warned that archetypes are double-edged. Each carries both light and darkness, the savior who redeems but also crucifies, the judge who restores balance but also destroys mercy. When the ego identifies with an archetype, it becomes the battlefield on which those opposites collide. To those around, it feels magnetic and terrifying. You sense power, clarity, destiny, but the person is no longer steering the wheel. The force now steering them does not care for proportion or compassion. It seeks expression, not balance, and it will burn through everything until the psyche collapses to restore equilibrium. History repeats this pattern endlessly. The prophet who began with vision ends as tyrant. The reformer who sought justice becomes judge and executioner. The healer who wished to save others cannot save themselves. Each believed they were chosen. Each mistook the echo of the collective unconscious for the voice of God. The tragedy of archetypal possession is that it begins as light, as calling, purpose, meaning, and ends as darkness disguised as destiny. And yet, this danger is not reserved for the powerful or the insane. It lives in everyone who forgets humility. Each time we say, "I could never do that," we forget how close we are to the edge. The line between human and archetype is as thin as a thought. So, when you meet conviction that admits no doubt, when you see eyes that glow with divine certainty, remember, you are not witnessing strength, you are witnessing possession. And possession does not end through argument or persuasion. It ends through collapse, when the light consumes itself and falls back into shadow. But not every collapse is destruction. Sometimes it is the beginning of awareness, because when certainty finally breaks, the person may glimpse for the first time the devastation left behind, and in that moment of ruin the soul whispers the most important question of all. What if I am the one repeating the pattern? After the fall comes silence. The voices of conviction fade. The mask lies shattered, and what remains is only confusion, the quiet ache of not knowing who you are. For Jung, this moment was not failure. It was the beginning of healing, because before awareness comes humility, and before humility, collapse. He observed that many people never reach this point. Instead, they live trapped inside what he called the compulsion to repeat, the invisible loop that binds the psyche to its unhealed wounds. The pattern is simple and devastating. A child is betrayed and grows into an adult who unconsciously seeks betrayal again. A heart abandoned learns to attract distance. A person humiliated keeps meeting those who make them feel small. Each time, the story changes, the faces change, but the ending stays the same. They say, "Why does this always happen to me?" They call it bad luck or fate. But fate is only the name we give to what we haven't made conscious yet. Beneath the surface, the psyche is trying to heal. It recreates the wound, hoping this time it will end differently. But because the pattern is unconscious, it never does. The repetition continues, a ritual of suffering mistaken for life itself. Jung called this negative synchronicity, the mysterious magnetism that draws us into situations that mirror our inner conflicts. We are pulled not toward what we desire, but toward what we deny. And until we face that denial directly, the loop remains unbroken. Modern neuroscience echoes this truth. Trauma doesn't just live in memory, it lives in the body. Neural pathways formed by pain become habits of perception. We interpret new experiences through the lens of the old, unconsciously shaping the world to confirm what we already believe about ourselves. That is why the most dangerous sign is not a single behavior, but the absence of reflection, the blindness that keeps the loop alive. A mind that cannot see itself will repeat itself, but awareness changes everything. The moment you name the pattern, you step outside it. The moment you admit, maybe it's me, the loop begins to dissolve, because the act of seeing transforms what was once automatic into choice. Shadow work, Jung said, is not about becoming pure. It's about becoming real. It's about gathering the fragments of your own contradictions and learning to hold them without judgment. When you recognize your anger, it no longer needs to disguise itself as righteousness. When you face your fear, it stops projecting monsters onto others. When you admit your desire for control, compassion becomes possible, because now you understand what drives it. The invisible loop breaks not through effort, but through honesty, through the simple, terrifying realization, I am both the wound and the healer. From that moment on, doubt returns, not as weakness, but as grace. The soul begins to whisper again. And the same chill that once warned you of danger now becomes the signal that you are waking up. For the first time, the light no longer blinds, it illuminates. And the self, fragile but free, steps out of repetition and back into reality. But there is still one final truth to understand: the return to wholeness itself. Do you remember that first chill? The faint unease when someone's smile didn't match their eyes. That silent signal in your body whispering, something isn't right. Now you know what it was. It wasn't fear of them, it was recognition. Your unconscious was sensing what the mind could not name, the absence of reflection, the loss of doubt, the most dangerous sign in a person. Jung believed that what we sense in others is never truly separate from ourselves. We perceive unconsciousness because something within us resonates with it. The shadow recognizes the shadow. That's why awareness of danger is also an invitation to self-knowledge. The chill does not ask you to judge others. It asks you to wake up, to remember that what you see in them may also live in you, and that by acknowledging it, you prevent it from taking over. The path forward is not to seek purity, but to embrace wholeness, to allow contradiction to coexist with clarity, to carry light and darkness together without mistaking either for the whole truth. Every time you pause before reacting, every time you ask yourself, could I be wrong? Every time you hold your own emotions with honesty instead of pride, you weaken the most dangerous sign. You reclaim your humanity from the forces that would rather possess it. Because the opposite of danger is not safety. It is consciousness, and so when that chill returns, when you sense something off in another, or in yourself, don't run from it. Listen. It is your inner compass, guiding you back to awareness. Jung once said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That is the work of a lifetime, and perhaps the only real protection we have. If this journey helped you see more clearly, subscribe to Alchemy of Mind and keep walking with us through the unseen.